Hello. Okay, we will start in a minute. I'm just waiting for Katie to get on so that I can add her to the chat and then we can start our chat. Hey, Steph. Nicole, yay! I'm so excited. Okay, all right. Katie is here. Okay, Katie, you have to send a request to join. Okay, let me do that. Okay, I've never done this before, so I'm a little awkward.
Hello.
Hi!
Hello, hello.
That's my hand. Okay. I am. All right. We're good. Hi!
Hi.
Oh, you look so good. I love your hair.
Thank you.
Okay, so I know you said there were tree cutters outside your house, but we're gonna work with it.
Yeah, I think they might be done with the majority of their tree cutting, though I probably shouldn't assume anything. They're fixing wires. So,
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today.
me
And
too.
I feel a little awkward. Hopefully I'm gonna ease into it as we start chatting, but I've never gone live before, so this is a little nerve-wracking, but luckily there are only three of us so far. Oh, four. Hey, Jackie. Okay, well, why don't we just start because we have a lot to talk about, and I know Instagram's
Yeah.
gonna kick us off after an hour, and yeah, so why don't we introduce ourselves? So for anyone watching this either now or later when we're on YouTube, I'm Kate Johnson, and I'm a writer. I am, I guess, a poet, since we're going to be talking about poetry today, and I wrote a poetry book, so I still feel weird calling myself that, though.
I know, right? Me too.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know what else to say right now, so why don't you tell people who you are?
Okay, my name is Katy Wimer, and I too am a poet, also a writer, I should say a journaler as well, hardcore journaler, um, healing artist, photographer. Those are kind of all my little titles.
And how did we meet? I
We
don't mind
met.
asking, I guess I could tell.
We met
I'm so used
in
to being in.
a beautiful writers group.
Yay! Love the Beautiful Writers group. So shout out to Linda. Uh,
Yes, in
yeah,
Severton.
I remember when I joined the Beautiful Writers group, and everybody on there was mostly writing nonfiction and memoir. And I felt so strange because I was writing fiction. And then I remember seeing you make a post about poetry and asking if anyone wanted to start a chat about poetry. And I was like, yay, I write poetry. I want to talk. And I think that was 6 years ago. It was like
Oh
five or
my,
6 years ago.
it's been
Yeah.
a while, yeah.
Yeah, it's been a
Wow,
while. It feels like just
I
yesterday.
didn't even register that.
Yeah, so that's how we met. We met online, and then I think my favorite part is the poetry retreat because I think it's just funny how we went about that. So
Two
for
people
people
who
who don't
barely
know,
knew each
oh,
other just decided, let's do a retreat.
that's just what I do. That's just what I do. So for people who don't know, the Beautiful Writers Group is an online writing group started by Linda Sievertson and Danielle Laporte. So join just to be part of a community of writers, and so that's how we met, like Katie said, and we knew each other just online through the writing group, and at some point we both were working on our poetry books, and I decided, well, let's have our own retreat because Linda Sievertson, she hosts her own writing retreats in Carmel, and I remember at the time it was a little bit pricey for my for my budget. So I was like, let's just do our own, and basically I just convinced you that I was coming to you, and I was like, all right, we're doing it. Here's the weekend, and I bought a plane ticket. All right, I'm coming.
I really honestly, I loved the forwardness so much because I was also like, I felt like I was in a place of procrastination with putting the whole thing together and just finishing it. because I had all the poems and I kept telling myself, like, there's a chapbook here. I have a chapbook of poetry here that just needs to happen. And then you're like, I just want to do a retreat and I know you want to do a retreat. And so we should really just get together. And so, yeah. And I love how you reminded me in our email that my husband, Dale, he actually made us food all weekend so that we could just be hardcore focused on our book. So major love to him for doing that awesomeness.
Thanks from me. Lots of love to you, Dale. I remember
It
I
was
almost
super
didn't make it.
fun.
It was really fun, and I almost didn't make it because at that time I had my son. He was about a year old, and like 2 weeks before I came to, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And so I was in the first trimester of pregnancy, and I had a really late flight. It was midnight, and I was really dumb, and I didn't eat from like 7 p.m. onward. And then I was on the flight, and I was really nauseous during that first trimester, and I got up to go to the bathroom because I thought I was going to be sick. Sorry if that's TMI. And then I almost fainted on the flight. So that was super fun. And the flight
Yeah,
attendant,
so then our first in-person, like face-to-face encounter is like you getting in my car and going, I really need water. I feel super nauseous. I almost fainted on the plane. And I'm just like, hey, we're in it. We are besties now. Like,
yeah, it was, yeah, that was really, I'm really excited that I eventually made it because that head flight attendant, she almost didn't. It was really dramatic too. Like they had ambulances waiting for me at the Toronto airport when I got there, and they
wait,
almost weren't going to let me get on my next flight.
oh no.
Yeah, it was pretty
I'm glad you
dramatic.
came.
So, okay, we are talking about poetry and the creative process today. So, since we're talking about our own poetry books, I thought I would show them off. So, I don't know if you have yours next to you, but I have yours. So, that's Katie's book, Whispered Howls by Katy Daixon Wimer. I always just
And
like
through the
mumble
breaking.
through your name because I don't know. I always forget how to pronounce it.
You did it. You did it.
I
Yeah.
did it. Okay.
Katy
Yay.
Daixon Wimer. Yep.
Yay. And then well, I have mine too, but I'm glad to see that you have mine too. So we have
And
our
then
poetry
the
go.
one I'm sending you.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited to see that. Can you just quickly like flip through it for people right now? Because I've never seen it before, so I want to see it. Super exciting. Oh, hey Donna.
Um,
No
little
problem. We're gonna be recording. This is I'm gonna be saving this for later, so you'll be able to watch it later if you really want. Hey,
And
hi.
also, I'm going to say, hey, Casey, because I saw that you joined.
Oh, yay. Okay, I wasn't sure who that was, so. Okay, so the first question that I want to kick off with, just so we can get it out there up front, is I thought it would be fun if we kind of describe how we got into writing, how we got into poetry specifically, because it's a very specific type of writing, and I feel like a lot of people are intimidated about writing poetry. I know I was, because I didn't even show people my poems for years and years and years. It was very nerve-wracking. So I'll let you start. So
Okay.
what got you into writing, and what drew you to writing poetry?
Well, man, I feel like my brain instantly just goes really far back, and I have loved writing since the moment I could write. And I love stories and storytelling. My parents told me I was always telling stories as a kid. Like the second I could talk, I was like, blah, 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 telling stories about the most random stuff. And in third grade, I received my first journal. And then from there, it was just like journaling all the time, writing poetry that usually rhymed. I rhymed probably until I was like 19, 20 years old, which is fine. Rhyming's great. I wrote a lot
I
about
think when
love
it's done
and
well, it's really
crushes. What? Say that again.
sorry, I think when when rhyming is done well, I think it's really effective.
Absolutely, totally. Yeah, so from third
We
grade on. And then I think I've just been writing. Yeah, I wrote poetry through, I have not written in a few months now, but mixed in there started to become like nonfiction stuff, creative nonfiction stuff. So more storytelling about my life versus
mm,
poetry. And and then dabbling in some fiction.
Nice. I swear we're like the same person.
I
Not
know.
only do we have the same name, not only are we both Scorpios, but your life story sounds just like mine.
When I saw when I saw your process posts like in your Instagram stories the last couple of days, I saw like your really old poems, like 7-year-old Kate is, this is her poem or whatever. I totally have all of my old poems. I have like a bound thing from
Oh my God.
school.
I need to see this. I need to see
Really?
this.
I'll show you.
Please, when we're done, send me some pictures.
I
Oh my,
will.
I remember my diary. I know I am so lucky that my grandma kept that one poem. That's the only one that I have because I don't even know if I wrote any other poetry. I, I hate to admit it, but I got rid of all my old journals because they were so embarrassing. Like grade 3 Kate
I
was
know they usually
so
are.
boy crazy.
Yeah.
Like one day I was like, I love Paul, and the next day it was like, I hate Paul.
Yep. Hey, these are important matters. These are
You're
important
very
matters.
matters of the heart. And look, if you read my book, you'll see I'm still writing about boys and
Right.
heartbreak and
Yep.
um, so
It's just more profound now.
more. So yeah, so for me, I like you, I've been writing my whole life since I can remember. I used to write stories in my journals. I remember writing stories about so I'm from Canada, and I don't know if people know who they are, but I used to be really obsessed with the 𝘒𝘢𝘵 quintuplet, and I had a bunch of short stories about them.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, and then I just got more into poetry as I got older. I actually hated poetry in high school. Funny enough, I don't know about you, but I was really not into it at all. I I know this is such a blasphemous thing to say, but I was like not into Shakespeare, not into like really
Oh, I see, like classic stuff.
the classic stuff. And it was just, well, when you're in high school, you're learning the basics of poetry, right? So you're learning what's a haiku, what's a sonnet, what's all the rules of poetry. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I just didn't get into it. But actually, I have it here. But when I was 17, I found this book in a little French shop in Ottawa. It's called Postcards from Paris. And this was the book that got me into poetry. So I was about 17. I'm just gonna put that down there. That was about 17 when I got into it. And I loved his poems because for the first time, I'll just sort of flip through it for you guys. Like I know everyone thinks Rupi Kaur, however you pronounce her name, started the whole illustration poetry thing, but I mean, people have been doing it for a long time, but his books were filled with poems and his
Little illustration.
illustrations, his time in Paris. It's just a really beautiful little book. So if anyone is interested, that's Postcards from Paris. It's by David Weidmark. I'm not sure if that's flipped.
It's good for me, not sure how it is live.
See it, right? Okay, so David, I'll put in my stories after. But that's the book that got me into poetry, and it was the first time I realized that poetry didn't have to be, so boring.
I think what's so super stereotypical about me is I'm pretty sure that Robert Frost is who got me into poetry. I mean, if I really were to try to think of something that triggered me to start or that fascinated me about poetry, it had to have been Robert Frost when I was in like middle school, maybe. I think is when I really
Oh, wow.
started to do. Yeah, so it was middle school that I was writing poetry, and then high school it got a little better, and then college I found my voice and I honed my craft, and it's definitely a process.
Absolutely. I think after I was done high school, I did a year-long sort of transition between high school and college called 𝘒𝘢𝘵, and I was in a liberal arts program, and I think that's probably where I started getting into more classical poetry because we were reading like Christina Rossetti, we were reading the Odyssey, all the Greek mythology, all of it, and I kind of grew to appreciate what I hadn't when I was a little bit younger and not as open-minded. So, but I still love modern poetry, but I definitely have a more appreciation for the classics. And since I started writing my own poetry, I've definitely started exploring more, reading more. So, little tip for anyone out there who wants to write poetry, honestly just read as much poetry as you can. Um, like it's better than any writing class. Just read as much as you can. And I think I think it wasn't until actually started getting into the writing of Through the Breaking that I started really exploring. Like I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself and blabbering on, but so I'll jump into sort of the next topic. Like let's start talking about the books.
Yeah.
So for me, Through the Breaking, I didn't write it to write poetry. It definitely was a book that came about of me just writing in my journal, trying to write through some traumas that I'd experienced, things that I'd gone through, heartbreak, all of that. And then somehow it just happened to come out as poetry, and I just sort of amassed this little collection. And it was actually David who encouraged me to. So I see this. I'm so forward. I reached out to him because we were both living in Ottawa at the time, and I reached out to him and I was like, "Hey, I'm a writer in the area, and I'd love to. I loved your book, so can I take you out for a cup of coffee?" And he graciously enough met up with me, and then he ended up paying for my coffee.
Aw, that's so
My
nice.
my card wouldn't work, and so I offered to buy him coffee, and he ended up buying my coffee, and then we became really good friends.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great
So,
story.
but it was really fun. But
Perfect.
he was the first person I ever showed a poem to outside of like maybe people who were close to me, and he was the first person who looked at that and he was like, "Hey, can I share that?" And and I needed validation so much at the time that I was like, "Oh my gosh, wow, he's so like this poet who's been nominated for a Governor General Award likes my poetry. I must be, not terrible."
You're not terrible.
But I'd love to hear how your book came about, because this is just honestly, everyone go out and buy Katie's book. This is such a beautiful collection of poetry. Um, I'm so excited. I was going through them last night. That's why I have the stickies, because we're going to read each other's poems at some point. We each picked out a poem to read, and I couldn't decide. There's like three that I still have to choose from, and I'm just going to go in the moment.
Yeah, me too. I have two from yours that I'm like, I don't know which one to choose. Yeah, so my collection, I started in my senior year of college. It was for my senior project, my senior writing project. And I really wanted to explore third person writing from other people's perspectives, because all of my poetry up until that point was from first person perspective. Ooh, Sandra joined. Hi, Sandra. Um,
See?
and I think the project was only supposed to be like 10 poems or something like that. But after I wrote those first 10, I kind of sat on it for, oh, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. And then I kind of went on a little spiritual quest, a little spiritual journey for myself when I was feeling kind of stuck in life. And I just kind of went on a road trip for like 2.5 weeks or something like that. And then something shifted um, within me. And I think it kind of helped my heart crack back open again. And so then the first half of the book has like the stuff I started. And then the second half of the book is kind of like the completion of what I had started. And it was almost a decade later, 7 years, I think, or 8 years later. And
I
it
don't
was
think
just one of those
people
things
realize
where,
how long, I don't think people realize how long this process takes.
yeah. And it was one of those things where it was like, oh, nope, that was exactly the way it was supposed to happen, the way it was supposed to unfold. Like, and then the very last poem of the book, or I'm sorry, the first poem of the book, I wrote the day that I was putting the book together. And I was like, this is the perfect intro to the book. So it's just like stuff just happens in its time, the way it's exactly supposed to go.
Absolutely. I have a similar experience with putting my book together. I think there was two poems that, or did I can't remember. So when we did our writing retreat, we had all our poems lined up on the floor, and that was a really fun process. I definitely Oh man, that was fun. We have to do that again.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. There's something so nice about just being like, okay, this one goes here, and this one goes here, and this one needs to go over here, and like this word connects to this word in this poem. It's
Yeah.
like putting puzzle pieces together.
I can't remember if I had the storm written when I went to your place or not. I feel like that was one of the poems that came out later. So I think it was, no, I had it when I went to your place. But there,
The
okay, so
storm.
there was at least one poem then that came at the very end. I was about to send my stuff to the publisher. I think I had like a week left before I was about to send everything to the printer, sorry, to print the books. And this poem, the one called The Dreamers, the one at the very end of the book. So I love that yours was at the very beginning of the book and mine was at the very end of the book. Um, Even though it's the poem, for me, it was the poem that would describe the beginning of all the rest of the poems. It just felt like it should come at the end for some reason. But yeah, it was like a week before, and it just kind of came out all at once.
Yeah,
And shared a
same.
little bit about it in my stories. But I remember thinking, wow, not that it's a perfect poem, but it came out, and I kept it pretty much almost the way I wrote it exactly the first time I put pen to paper. And I think I made a couple of word adjustments, but other than that, it just came out all at once. I was like, I can't believe that just came out like that. And then I realized recently that the poem had started as a song, and so it was pretty much already written already, and then it like percolated for a bit, and then it eventually just came out as a poem, which I thought was really
Nice.
cool. Yeah, so that yeah, similar experience. I just want to know, when it comes to writing, do you have any kind of writing rituals that you do when you sit down to write a poem? Like for me, I I like to write in a notebook with a pen. Sometimes I'll light a candle if I'm feeling really fancy.
Yes, I'm similar. I always handwrite. It's rare that I type first. I'll do that if I'm so inspired that my hand can't go as quickly as my mind.
Mm,
But otherwise, I'm usually the slow process person where I kind of think through things and like feel the words and
mm.
stuff. That makes sense.
Yes.
And yeah, so handwriting. And I usually do prefer to write when it's dark. Um, in the evening is when poetry comes to me. Otherwise, the morning, my morning ritual is journaling, self-reflection.
Okay. I actually haven't journaled in a while. It's been really crazy around here, getting ready for school and stuff. And yeah, I definitely need to get back to it because this whole quarantine experience has been pretty, been a really good opportunity for self-reflection, but I haven't been doing a lot of journaling lately. But ever since Taylor Swift came out with Folklore, I've been listening on a repeat, but I thought, damn, that girl is so creative. And she came up with that during quarantine. I was listening to it and it really inspired me. So lately I've been feeling that itch to write again and to create and maybe dive into some new subjects. Um, how do you feel about your book now that it's been a couple of years since you put it out? Like,
Okay, I'm really glad you asked because there was like a year or two ago, at when I launched my second collection of poetry where I almost felt annoyed by this first collection. Once I Because my second collection is so different from this one, and because a lot of these poems are based on so much grief. Hey, Tasha. Because these poems are based on so much grief, that women experience in relationship to men and to themselves, if they're not kind of in alignment with who they are. It was like it made me mad to like read the poems again, even though there's a process that unfolds throughout the book. But then just now, before our Instagram Live, I read through all the poems again for the first time in about a year, and I was like, oh, this is actually like really nice. So I kind of had like a little like I did a 180 with my collection where I have like a new love for it. And maybe it's because I took some time to separate myself from it for a while because I was like constantly reading them and talking about them and stuff like that. And
it's
yeah.
hard, especially because I know it's funny, like, but I think that's another reason why we connected because our poetry was so similar at that time,
Yeah.
in the sense that we were writing through grief and trauma. And so now when I read through my book, I feel so disconnected from it because I've grown so much since I wrote those poems. I know when people say going through trauma and stuff that it's so hard to see the end. It's so hard to see yourself on the other side and see that light at the end of the tunnel. And I think even at the time that I was working on the book, I thought I'd come far enough to write about everything. And now that it's been 5 years since I put that out there and I read these poems, I think, like, I feel just so bad for the girl who wrote those poems because
Yeah.
I'm like on
Yeah.
the other side of the grief and the trauma, and which is a really great place to be. So I still get people telling me how much they connect with the poems and how it reminded them of, their own younger days and things they'd gone through. And recently I had a friend of mine tell me that when she read it, she read it, she sat down, read it, and then she like walked into the other room and she started crying. And I was like, oh my God. And so I forget sometimes that, people who might be going through that stuff now and they read them and they can connect with them, but it's hard for me, just because I'm so far from it now that I don't really relate to them anymore. I'm in such a different phase of life. But
Well,
I
what
try
I
to appreciate them for what they are.
Yeah, and what I think is really beautiful about our collections is that they're a permission to feel
Mm,
into your situation. Like they're something that provides people an outlet to be like, oh yeah, other people have experienced this, or like I'm not alone, or things like that. And so even if we may feel disconnected in our journey at this point, like you said, a lot of people are like, because yeah, I had people read it who were like, oh my God, that was so heavy, and I had to pause after many poems to just like digest and stuff like that, where I could just devour it. I can just read through and be like, well, that was a good process, moved through it. But some people take longer time, and
mhm,
but I still think that it's effective in, I don't know, hopefully doing some kind of healing, or at the very least, just feeling seen for the reader.
mm. Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's so important. I think that's why I write. Um,
Yeah.
Not just because I have this innate desire or drive inside me that's like I can't not write, but I also have that desire to, be heard and be seen. And everyone
Hmm.
has that in them. So I think it's whether you're reading something that you relate to or whether you're writing something that someone else can relate to, I think it's such a beautiful relationship between words and people and healing and just how we can affect each other.
Yeah.
Um, Art.
And that's actually a question I wanted to ask was, why do you write poetry?
Mm.
Or like why were
I write
like what
poetry.
is poetry to
Mm.
you?
What is poetry to me? So for me, I'll start by describing just what art is in general, and then I'll get into the poetry. But for me, art is, um, first of all, it has to be beautiful. I'm just not just visually, but I love beauty, and I mean that in more than just a physical aesthetic sense. I just mean like soul and heart. So to me, poetry is out of all the ways we can write, to me, poetry is beautiful. It's a way to express yourself in a really beautiful way. And I think for me, going back to the general art has to make me feel something. And I'm such a feeler. So
Yeah.
um, if it's something that makes me feel something, that's what art is to me. It makes me feel something and it's beautiful. And so poetry is just a way to express yourself in a really beautiful way. I also come from a background of being a reporter and being on tight deadlines and having specific word counts, and you're having to write and fit, it's like your editor tells you, I need this article, it has to be 300 words, and then you get it back and she's like, oh, can you actually cut it down to 250 because we don't have enough space. And I love the idea of taking a big concept and trying to express that in as small a space or as little words as possible.
Hmm.
Just sort of like little bite-sized concepts of life. I
Yeah.
find challenge really, really fun for me personally. So, what about you? What does poetry mean to you?
Yeah, totally relate to that succinctness. I I feel like poetry is pulling pulling something from the depths, I guess. I always picture it as like I actually put this as the last line in one of my poem, like one of my newest poems recently, but just the idea of like swimming down to the bottom of like a lake or the ocean or something, and then bringing back up a treasure. Like that's kind of what poetry reminds me of. Like you're bringing up like you're kind of exposing, bringing to the light something from the depths in like a very short space for people to like comprehend quickly.
I love that. Really
That's
do.
that's what I got for poetry. That's
I'm
what
picturing
poetry
it in
makes
my
me
mind
feel.
right
Yeah.
now. Was there any poem in your book in particular that was really difficult to write? Going back to the theme of grief and trauma and using art to work through work through those things that we need to heal from.
Yes. Probably past lives um, was particularly difficult because it's kind of pulling from my history. Some truth, some possible gossip within like my family life. Another one that was really hard was postponement.
Mm.
That the title of that one is based on a tarot card. And for a hot minute when I got back from my little spiritual quest, I was like, I'm gonna write a collection of poetry based on tarot cards. But then the themes that were coming out based on those tarot cards fit my collection so well. And so I was like, oh, okay, it's just got to go in with that collection and we'll just see where it goes. And Postponement was one of those poems that I kept avoiding it. I kept avoiding that card because that tarot card in the Osho Zen tarot deck is about basically how often we say like, oh, I'll just do it tomorrow. Like, or I'll think about that tomorrow, or I'll do that thing tomorrow, or start that whatever tomorrow. And because this collection has so much to do with sex and intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
um, the postponement one was definitely a challenge because it was about my very own intimacy. And yeah, so I would say that one for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, both of those poems that you just mentioned are two of the options of the one that
Ah,
I read. So now I
nice.
don't know which one to choose.
Oh boy.
Uh, Actually,
Hey, Martha.
now that you've talked a little bit about them, I think that's a good spot for us to take a little poetry reading break from the discussion.
Sure.
So I'm going to, um, all right, I think I kind of want to read. Would you be against me reading both of them?
No.
No? Okay. I love them both so much. I mean, I love all the poems in this book, but I also really love what carves us. But people want to know more, they can go out and buy the book. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I'll read Postponement. Or do you want to read one of them? How about you read one and I read one?
Okay. Um, you read Postponement and
I
I'll read the
okay. So this is Postponement from Whispered Howls by Katy Daixon Wimer. Tomorrow I'll feel better. Tomorrow I'll be more vulnerable. Tomorrow we can kiss like we mean it and fuck like nothing matters and make the headborn drum the beat of ancient primal instincts. Tomorrow I'll be more open, more deserving of the energy that throbs between us on the bed sheets, that hold the secrets we've shared for years. Tomorrow I'll let go of the pain. Tomorrow I'll ask for more tomorrows because today is always too heavy to let you into me. I am too heavy to allow today to be the day I accept tomorrow may never come. I really relate to that poem so much. I think probably a lot of people would relate to it. I mean, we all procrastinate, we all put things off, especially intimacy and being vulnerable with other people. Like, who wants to do that? Right?
No.
Um,
Ooh,
but I know you talked a little bit about it already. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about the writing of that poem and you said it was a really difficult one to write. So what was it that got you to finally sit down and write those words?
good question. I don't know. I think the word tomorrow started popping in my head, and it was like, what do I tell myself around intimacy? That I'm, saying tomorrow this or tomorrow that. And so I think that's where that started. But then the reason it took so long and why it was so challenging is because I think it was just admitting things to myself, that was actually dialogue I was having in my head, like, or even spoken out loud to my husband.
Yeah.
Um, so to write it down meant that it was really me admitting that I did that sometimes, and so yeah, challenging for sure. Thank you for reading it. I don't think I've ever heard someone else read that back to me. So
Yeah, it's so different hearing, it's one thing to read a poem on the page just in your mind, and then you read it out loud, and then to hear other people read it. Like everyone comes to the table with their own interpretations
yeah,
and their own feelings and their own thoughts about a poem, which I think is really beautiful. I've been watching some poetry videos lately just on YouTube, and there's one poet in particular, I'm not going to name, but she came on YouTube to kind of defend her poetry, which I don't think people should really have to defend their work. I mean, it's your work, it's your offering to the world, but people were really tearing her stuff down, and she came on and she's like, well, this poem is supposed to mean this, and this poem is supposed to mean that, and that's where I kind of like went, well, when you write something, it means something to you, but when you put it out there, it's going to mean something to whoever's reading it. And once it's out there, it's not really yours anymore. You'll always have your own personal interpretation of it or your own feelings about it, but other people are allowed to have their own interpretation and their own feelings about it too. So
yeah,
I bring my own stuff when I read that poem, and it brings me back to, even up until recently, just learning how to be more vulnerable with the people I love, and just show up for myself and for other people, because it's even in therapy, I'm like my therapist was taking me through an exercise, like a guided meditation at some point, taking me back to like my childhood or whatever, and I was like, I'm saying the words, but I feel like I'm saying them behind a wall or behind like water. Like I couldn't break through because there's just that I guess wall is the only, for lack of better words, it's like that it's difficult to be intimate. It's difficult to be vulnerable, even in private. So I definitely relate to that poem very much.
yeah. I feel like that came up a lot when I had beta, like, I guess beta readers. Before putting the full book together, I had people read through the poems and let me know what they thought, like their interpretation of the overall theme, and just to kind of assess each poem to say like how they relate and stuff like that. It was very interesting to see people's different interpretations and how it fit into their lives. And so, yeah, people are going to take what they need to take from the message of the poem, and it could be completely different than what you wrote it for,
Yeah,
which I think is the magic of poetry.
I think so too. Like I have one poem in Through the Breaking. It's called Bruise, and we were talking about this recently too. But
Oh,
I was doing an artist. I was at an artisan market, and a woman came up to me who had read. She had bought the book and she read it, and she's like, I got out of a physically abusive relationship too, and going on, and so I was like, oh, okay, so that's what she's taking from it. And then I realized like a lot of people got that from the poem. But for me personally, it wasn't that at all. I was not in a physically abusive relationship. Mentally and emotionally, that's a different story. But for me, like the bruise came out of a different reason. That's all I'll say.
yeah.
And but because I wrote that poem in such anger, it came across that, and like that's what a lot of people connect. That's the part that people connect with, and people, again, like you said, bring their own interpretation to it. And I was
Yep.
like, well, I'm glad you could relate to it, and glad that meant something to you. And then I just didn't say anything because, like, it's not, you know, she had her own experience and I had my own experience, and that was
Mhm.
the beauty of the poetry. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
I'd love to hear you. I don't know, were you going to read mine or do you want to read yours? Or
I was gonna say, I was gonna ask you, what do you want me to do first? We can read yours and revisit mine, or what do you want to hear?
okay, let's do mine, and then just
Okay.
for I actually don't have the timer up in front of me, so I don't know where we're at for time, but
It's 11:40.
11:40. Okay, so let's do mine, and then we'll read yours again after, and then we'll touch on a couple of other things before we get going.
Sounds good. Okay, the poem I chose from your collection is Lost Girl.
Oh, okay.
I am a lost girl, just like the lost boys, though they were children and I'm supposed to be a woman. And you're a lost boy too, in the form of a man. And in between the space of our other lives, we find each other alone. Your lips steal from mine in a single moment, and I weep for what will never be and for what is already gone. It's such a beautiful, like, I don't know, it's a very poignant way to talk about loss, I guess. Loss in any kind of sense that you are saying goodbye to a past thing.
Hmm.
And that's what sits with me when I read that one.
Gosh, I haven't thought of that poem in a while. I see. I didn't read through mine before we got on here, so I was so curious which one you were going to choose. Um, that poem was another one that actually came out kind of just in a flurry, and I didn't really do much editing to it, but it definitely it came from a specific experience with a specific person, but I feel like it also embodies in general a lot of feelings I had and things that I've since worked through. But I used to be really, like, really, really big, deep abandonment wounds. And so I always had this fear sitting deep down inside me of people are going to leave, I'm going to get left. And I carried that feeling with me for so long. And so when I wrote that poem, I was talking about part of the poem was talking about that experience of before something's even started, I know you're already going to leave and I know it's already gone. And so like before anything's even happened, that grief is already there. Um, and then the other part of it was that, and I've since learned a lot more about trauma and the way people get stuck in patterns and things like that. But, and I think there's this running theme through a lot of the poems in that book, but particularly in this poem, there's a reference to the Lost Boys from Peter Pan, Neverland, like never growing up, never getting older. And so that was another piece of me that I've since worked through where I just always felt like a child. I always felt like other people know better. I'm just stuck in this mentality of like, I need to be told what to do. I don't know better. I don't know enough. I'm just this child. And so this poem kind of grew from, and this person that I wrote the poem about too was a bit older than me. And so I also felt like a child, like not older, like in a creepy way, but he was older than me. And so already there was this sort of like power imbalance, us just being at different places in our lives. And so I felt very much like a child and like, yeah, grieving that loss before it even happened. So that's how that poem came about.
Nice.
Whew.
The other one, I know, right? It's like,
I know
oh,
it's so
somebody's
nerve-wracking.
reading my poetry and I have to think about it. And the other one that I chose for you, it just says everything. When you spilled out of me, I could no longer contain the ocean.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just such a,
When I
just
think
like,
about it, I cry. There's so much more, and that's why I want to start writing again. There's so much more that I want to explore about motherhood I feel like I only touched on it a little bit in this book just because I was such a new mom. My son was only 1. I was newly pregnant with my daughter, so I was still like in the thick of it.
Hmm.
And now that my kids are a bit older and I can sort of reflect back on all of that, I just want to dive into that. And water is such a big imagery for me. The ocean, my son's name means ocean. It's just, it really does feel like there's so much in that poem. And I know I've had people read it and be like, oh, it's only 2 lines. Like, I don't get it.
These 2 lines that are that hold so much energy and weight.
Oh, it's like I'm feeling it now. Like I'm kind of trying to breathe and calm down because I feel it.
Yeah.
Said that. Um, yeah, there's so much, especially, and that poem speaks so much to my past experiences of when I was younger too. Like when I was 19, I had a pregnancy and then an abortion. So, which I also write about in the book, and that was really tough to put out there. And even now, saying it in the live, I'm like, oh my God, I just said that I had an abortion. But when I had my son, it brought up all that grief and all of the emotions and all of the stuff that I'd pushed down for so long. And so that's what that means to me. It's like, you can't, like, you were born, and then it's just like, I couldn't pretend not to feel anymore. And at that point in my life, I went through some postpartum depression after he was born, and I felt very disconnected from him. And I eventually realized that it was that wall that was up. It was, I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to get hurt, but it was hurting me because of that. It was preventing me from connecting with my son and from loving him fully and having that bond with him. And so I had to start working through that. And it was like, yeah, like the floodgates just opened. Like I had to finally start working through everything. And everything just, yeah, came up. I could go on, but I think I'm.
That is totally what poetry does, though, always.
Oh, I didn't know you were going to make me feel something, Katie.
My goal has happened. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I'm trying to think if I guess very quickly, we're going to have to do another Instagram live. We're going to have to do another one about the publishing process because I feel like, because we didn't really even get to dive into that. Because I was like, oh, I have my original notes and like everything from
Oh, nice.
there, but I think that's another one. I think, yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to ask you about your poems and your process. Oh yeah, what's up next?
Ooh, okay. So I have been
How has
dabbling.
Sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
I want to like sort of I want to amend that. So like, what's up next? But like, how has your writing evolved since you wrote that book? Like, especially now you have a second book of poetry out, which I'm really excited to read.
Yeah. So my second book of poetry, I feel like I have a lot of chapbooks in the works, that I haven't visited in a while, but there's definitely one that's going to be all love letters to my husband. So those are just like reflections on our relationship throughout the years. And even though the collection may be titled Love Letters, perhaps, I don't know, they're not necessarily all like emotionally mushy gushy type stuff. They're genuinely like reflections on the shit we've been through in our relationship. So I have a nice handful of those, and I do have a collection on grief because there was pretty much like a death a year for like at least a decade of my life where it was just dealing with a lot of grief. And after writing Whispered Howls, I didn't want to write another collection full of grief because I felt like I was just too in it. But Rooted in Light is inspired by Mary Oliver, who is one of my favorite poets.
Me too. I love Mary Oliver.
She's so great. And so these really touch on my relationship with the spirituality of nature. So my connection to Mother Earth and finding God in nature. So that's what Rooted in Light is. Otherwise, I'm dabbling in fiction with a fiction novel where the main character is perhaps a mystic. I don't know how to describe her, but it's mystical, magical. There are going to be fairies and random characters that perhaps are dead and she sees them. And
oh my God. Do you read Francesca Leah Block? Have you read
No.
Oh my God, I'm
Mm-mm.
gonna send you some books of hers. I think you'd really. Okay, I want to read everything you're writing right now, so you have to get on it and finish so I can read it.
Okay, you got it. I'll send you what I have so far,
Okay, so
for the
excited.
fiction book. Otherwise, other poems that I've written that just have come out of me have been, I think, just a lot of some personal stuff, and then a couple of poems that were just like humorous. That when quarantine started, I I would write about something really dark because at the beginning of the lockdown with the virus, I definitely was struggling a little bit, and then but then also kind of played around with some humorous things because I was just sitting here like watching my cats and decided to write a poem about cats. And then when you were talking about motherhood, it actually made me think about how I wrote a poem about my choice not to
Mm.
be a mom. And
And
so
I,
that was the time
yeah,
that came out.
that is so important. Especially now, I think so many women in general, we get so much pressure to have kids, and it's such a personal decision. And I just love hearing all the different perspectives because I don't think anyone should ever be pressured to have kids. No one should be pressured to not have kids. It's all of it. We go through a lot as women, don't we?
Yes.
But that would be so fun if we collaborated and we did like a book about motherhood, and you had your choice not to be a mother and I had my choice to be a mother, and we, I don't
Ooh.
know, somehow like float it all together. That could be really fun.
Yeah, totally.
Um,
Collaboration.
I have not been as productive as you. I haven't really written poetry at all since this book, but I'd been working on a novel for a really long time. And it's now set aside. I don't know if I'm going to go back to that particular novel, but once again, we're on the same page of what we want to write about. And I also have a fiction novel that's kind of with fairies, and it's like urban fantasy. And it was something I started at this beginning of quarantine just because I wanted something fun to write. Like everything
Yeah.
I've done in the past has been so heavy and so like ugh, like weighing me down, and I just didn't want to be in that energy anymore. So I was like, I'm gonna write something fun. So I started doing that, and I want to just write about, and I also want to work on a book about love. And I don't know yet if it's going to be a memoir, if it's going to be essays, but I think it's going to follow my journey to um, not just romantic love, but just sort of my journey towards loving myself and opening myself up so that I can love my children better, and just love other people better in general, and be a better friend and better partner and all of that. So I'm really excited to explore those topics, but nothing concrete yet, nothing that's coming out anytime soon. I'm just
Yeah, same here.
yeah, I'm just excited to create.
Al- Although I will say, you were talking about how you were interested in revisiting journaling because you're like, I haven't written in a while.
Mm,
I I am hoping to put together a journal with prompts in it because I realized I've come up with so many prompts over the last year that I have enough to create a journal. So I might publish a journal of or I guess a journal with prompts. So then the prompt will be at the top and then with lots of space for people to write that.
that
So
would be amazing. That would be awesome. So, well, Katie, my dear, it has been such a lovely experience chatting with you this morning. I love you so much, and I always feel really happy and uplifted after I talk to you.
same.
So I hope you have a
Same.
beautiful day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for joining.